Hey guys, it's me. Shut up, Tyler. But guess what, guys? Boo! Happy Halloween. Why don't we talk about some spooky video games today, yeah? So, technically, the first ever horror game is in 1981's 3D Monster Maze game. I think it's pretty scary. This is how we're starting horror games off with today. Next game we got is Haunted House, which was a game in 1982 for the Atari 2600, which was an adventure game where you play as a pair of eyes exploring a mansion to avoid monsters. Next game that we got here is Sweet Home, which is a 1989 survival horror RPG game that basically is a predecessor to what Resident Evil is, where 5 filmmakers go and film in this old haunted house. I think if you really want to talk about spooky horror games, I think that there's one series that shines on the NES, being the original Castlevania trilogy. For those that don't know, Castlevania is a side-scrolling horror game where the Belmonts, mainly Simon in the first game, is on a quest to defeat Dracula because of the family curse, and these are very, very tough but fair games that kind of spawned into its own franchise. For right here, we have the Adventure game, I think, on the Game Boy, where you play as a lot of the Belmonts throughout the games, and sometimes Alucard, Dracula's son, and throughout the games too. So I do recommend Castlevania. I played a decent amount of side-scrollers, and they also did help pioneer some of the Metroidvania games with that too. So I definitely think that they have earned their right in spooky game history. Something similar around this time too was Ghosts and Goblins, where it was another side-scroller, but I think this difference is that it's a lot harder and it's not as forgiving, but it did also manage to receive a sequel on the Super Nintendo back in 1991 called Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I've never been a big fan of this series, but I do think it's very worth noting. A staple in survival horror games is Resident Evil, and especially 1 through 8. I believe that there's some spin-offs with these as well, but for those that don't know, is that this takes place mainly like with a bunch of protagonists. Usually it's either Chris Redfield or Leon Kennedy. Leon here being the main one in Resident Evil 2 and 4. I do think that these are very different though too. I feel like it's a lot more of an interactive horror game that you play with this, especially some of the abominations that you see throughout, especially later in the franchise. I was going to talk about Fort Nightmares, but I think this clip I got here is pretty cursed as is.
You can take a walk.
Like Scoob! I said I wanted a milkshake, not milkers!
You guys want to talk about Luigi's Mansion? The original game coming out in 2001 and the GameCube, this was Luigi's first foray into his own game, especially with him being something a little different with this too. It's not typically a platformer, but rather like a horror-based adventure game that you find. Luigi had 3 games so far, but then in a remake of the first and second game too. Pokemon has a bit of a spooky theme going on with it too, mainly with Lavender Town back in the original Red and Blue and Yellow games as well. In the Kanto games, you always have to go through Lavender Town, this little town right here, and you have to clear the Pokemon Tower, which is basically where ghosts and dead Pokemon are laid to rest. And I've always liked the Red, Blue, and Yellow version the most, not only because of the creepy factor of it too, but it's spawning in a very iconic creepypasta called Buried Alive. With this too, with some unused, scrapped designs for like sprites and stuff for a boss that you had to do. I always thought that was really cool. My first real foray to a spooky game was in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl with the old chateau, or somewhere in the Eterna Forest that you can find this abandoned haunted mansion too. Speaking of haunted houses, have you ever heard of a game franchise called House of the Dead, made by Sega? For those that don't know, this started out as a light gun game in arcades where you basically would have to shoot the undead, and that you would have to use it as like a reaction-based game with it too. While I'm not as familiar with this franchise, I would like to give a special shout out to Silent Hill, as this was a PlayStation series that basically helped define and reshape a lot of different horror games that you would see today. I suppose it is fair to say in more modern gaming that you see a lot of horror games, mainly in indie titles such as with Limbo, Poppy's Playtime, and Five Nights at Freddy's, I think arguably the biggest one of these, exploding back in 2014. But why don't you take some candy and why don't you let me know what you guys think of horror games and what some of your favorite horror game franchises. Anyways, I'll see you later and have a happy Halloween. Bye bye.